All right, now we get to get into the anatomy of the endocrine system a little bit more, and we're talking about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So I highly encourage you to use your notes along with this to just kind of follow along. So we're going to start off with that the hypothalamus actually controls the pituitary gland, and it's above the pituitary gland within our brain, and so it's actually going to control how the pituitary reacts and does things. And then this is going to the pituitary is going to control the thyroid, the adrenals, the liver, the testes, and the ovaries. So you can kind of think of it as like a cascade event, or even like a leadership pyramid there, that you've got your highest level up here making all the decisions, and then next guy is making the decisions for everybody below, right? So the pituitary gland is going to lie inferior, like I said, to the hypothalamus in what's called the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. It's very small, it's about the size of a pea, and it's connected to the hypothalamus by what's called the infundibulum, or the stalk, and it actually looks like that, just a small little stalk that's connecting it to the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland is partitioned into the anterior and the posterior pituitary lobes. So you'll want to take a chance to go ahead and look at the picture. You can look at mine. There's much better drawings online, so you can find those. But that'll kind of help give you a visual of where they're located. So the posterior pituitary is smaller than the anterior pituitary, and it's part of the pituitary gland, right? And it develops as a bud from the developing hypothalamus. Okay, so in our brain, when we're in the womb, it's going to start to go ahead and come out from the hypothalamus. It's composed of what's called the pars nervosa, or the lobe, and also, of course, the infundibulum, that stalk that's connecting it to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamic neurons project through the infundibulum and are going to release hormones into the pars nervosa of the posterior pituitary gland. So somas in paraventricular nucleus and the suprapotic nucleus, and axons are going to be found in the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. So remember, somas are just the cell bodies of neurons. And axons are going to come through in the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract of the infundibulum, right, into the pituitary gland. Synaptic knobs are going to be in the pars nervosa, again, inside the pituitary, the posterior pituitary part. Now, the anterior pituitary is going to be larger, and it's the glandular part of the pituitary gland. It develops from the ectoderm of the oral cavity when we're growing inside of the womb, and it's partitioned into three areas, okay? So it's got the pars distalis, which is the large anterior rounded portion. The pars tuberalis is a thin wrapping around the infundibulum, and then the pars intermedia, which is the scant region between the two other areas, right? So that makes sense, the intermediate in between the distalis and the tuberalis. So the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system of blood vessels is made up of a couple different things. We have the primary plexus, which is a porous capillary network that's associated with the hypothalamus. Then we have the secondary plexus, which is the capillary network associated with the anterior pituitary gland. And then the hypophyseal portal veins, which are going to drain the primary plexus and transport that blood to the secondary plexus. All right, so kind of talking about the interactions between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland, and then we'll talk about the interactions between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland, right? Because they're connected, they're going to be controlled. So the posterior pituitary is a storage and release site for oxytocin, also known as OT in short form, and antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. These hormones are made in the hypothalamus by neurosecretory cells. They're going to be packed in secretory vesicles and transported by fast axonal transport through the infundibulum, and they're going to be released from synaptic knobs into blood when neurons fire impulses. Remember, we've got all these blood vessels that are surrounding the pituitary gland to allow for quick transport to the rest of the body of those hormones. So oxytocin is made in the paraventricular nucleus, and it has a couple of functions. We've talked about this: uterine contraction, milk ejection, and emotional bonding. And then antidiuretic hormone, or that ADH, is a vasopressin. So it's made in the supraoptic nucleus. It functions in the decrease of urine production. It stimulates our thirst and constricts our blood vessels. So the hypothalamus hormonally stimulates the anterior pituitary to release its hormones. The hypothalamus secretes regulatory hormones, right? So they're going to regulate through the portal blood vessels to the pituitary how much it's going to go ahead and release or produce. The anterior pituitary secretes hormones into the general circulation. So talking about the anterior pituitary gland and the hypothalamus, again, those regulatory hormones of the hypothalamus are going to include releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. So releasing hormones, of course, are going to increase the secretion of the anterior pituitary gland, and they're going to include the thyrotropin releasing hormone, or TRH, the prolactin releasing hormone, or PRH, the gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH, and growth hormone releasing hormone, GHRH. So notice we have a lot of these hormones that are like, I release this hormone. So there's a lot of ability to regulate here just from the hypothalamus down. And then those inhibiting hormones, of course, are going to decrease the secretion of the anterior pituitary hormones. And they're going to include prolactin inhibiting hormones, so opposite of that prolactin releasing hormone. And prolactin inhibiting hormone we call PIH, and then growth inhibiting hormone, or GIH. So the anterior pituitary has these guys called tropic hormones, and we're going to talk a little bit about those, and also prolactin. So the first one is the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. It releases its release triggered by the the thyroid releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and it causes a release of the thyroid hormone. So notice we actually have like 3 different ones here. We have the thyroid releasing hormone, and then we have the thyroid stimulating hormone, and then we have the thyroid hormone itself coming from the thyroid gland. The next one that we have is prolactin, again PRL. Its release is triggered by prolactin releasing hormone. It's inhibited by the prolactin inhibiting hormone, and it's going to go ahead and cause milk production and mammary gland growth in females. Our next one is the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. Along with the corticotropin hormone. Its release is triggered by the corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. See a trend. And it causes the release of corticosteroids by the adrenal cortex, or the adrenal glands right on top of our kidneys. Our next one is the gonadotropin. So this, for example, is the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and the luteinizing hormone, LH. And hopefully you remember those from last year. Their release is triggered by the gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. And in the female, it's going to regulate ovarian development and secretion of estrogen and progesterone. And in the male, it's going to regulate sperm development and secretion of testosterone. So our 5th one is the growth hormone, or GH. And its release is triggered by the growth hormone releasing hormone, and it's inhibited, of course, by the growth hormone inhibiting hormone from the hypothalamus. It causes the liver to secrete insulin like growth factors and actually helps us grow naturally. So a little clinical view for you. The hypophysectomy is a surgical removal of the pituitary gland because of tumors. It's preferred surgical approach through the nasal cavity. And then various hormones need to be replaced, and their levels need to be monitored, obviously, to go ahead and allow your body to keep doing the things that it does. So a little check for understanding. 3 questions. Where are secondary plexus blood vessels located? They're going to be found on the anterior pituitary gland. Where are tropic hormones synthesized, and what is their general function? That's going to be, again, in the anterior pituitary gland. And their general function, a lot of things, right? So they're going to be regulating the release of other hormones like growth hormone, or follicle stimulating hormone, or luteinizing hormone, right? So they're going to cause a release of other hormones. And our 3rd one is, where is oxytocin synthesized and where is it released? It's synthesized in the posterior pituitary gland, and it's released from the posterior pituitary gland, and it's made specifically in the paraventricular nucleus.